I think it comes back down to like putting out content that's unique or something different that people don't see every day is really going to be the thing that catapults you. Like you can run paid ads to any newsletter and you'll probably get a few subscribers. But if it's not something that people look at and they go, whoa, this is different, or whoa, this is saving me time, I think it's going to be really hard to take like the growth that you've started and really amplify that, if you will. So I really think it starts with content. I've gotten a lot of good feedback of people saying like, I read this every week. I look for this in my inbox, which is always a good sign. I think if you find something your audience really enjoys reading every single week, you're going to have an easier time.
Welcome to the Undefeated Underdogs podcast, where I unpack and narrate stories of ambitious people who turn obstacles into opportunities. My goal for this podcast is to create a platform to narrate underdog stories and maybe play a small, teeny tiny role in inspiring you. I intend to highlight the underdog mentality and make authentic conversations with people who play the long game, take action with a chip on their shoulder, and convert obstacles into opportunities. Buckle up, as I'll be bringing some authentic founders, VCs, community builders, and content creators who got underestimated their whole lives, and yet they beat all the odds to become insanely successful. Now, today I want to tell you a little bit about our awesome sponsor, Acquire.com. Selling a business is as tough as building a business. As someone who went through this process once, selling my own startup, I know the pain it takes to get to the end zone. This is where our sponsor shines. Imagine this. You're a founder who's built a solid SaaS product, acquired customers, and generating consistent monthly revenue. The problem is you're not growing for whatever reason. Lack of focus, lack of skill, or just plain lack of interest, and you feel stuck. What should you do? The story I'd like to hear is you buckled down, somehow reignited the fire, get past yourself and the cliches, and start working on your business rather than just in the business. You start building an audience, move out of your comfort zone to do sales and marketing, and in 6 months, you triple your revenue. The reality isn't as simple. Situations may be different from every founder facing these crossroads, but too many times, the story ends up being one of inaction and stagnation until the business becomes less valuable or worse, worthless. If you find yourself here or your story is likely headed down a similar road, I offer you a third option. Consider selling your business on Acquire.com. Capitalizing on the value of your time is a smart move. Acquire.com is free to list and they've helped hundreds of founders already. Go to try.acquire.com/Sharath and see for yourself if this is the right option for you. Now, let's get into today's episode. Welcome, folks. Welcome to yet another episode of the Undefeated Underdogs podcast. I'm your host, Sharath. I'm fresh. I just took a big shower and I'm prepared for this amazing podcast interview with none other than Chenell Basilio. Welcome to the show. I hope I didn't butcher your last name, but Chenell, welcome to the show. How are you feeling today?
I'm doing well. I appreciate it. Thank you, Sharath.
Absolutely, yeah. So, I first discovered your newsletter, Growth in Reverse, in March of this year, and I've been a big fan. That's one of the newsletter I open every week for sure. No matter what, that's how I learned about you, the way you do research, the way you give shoutouts to like the community and whatnot. So big fan of yours, and I'm very stoked to bring you on the show. For
Thank you.
folks who doesn't know Chenell, she's a powerhouse of knowledge, I would say, about strategic thinking, about growth in general. Her incredible ability to reverse engineer the growth strategies of top creators, founders, and startups made her launch this newsletter called Growth in Reverse, which has amassed over 50,000 plus subscribers. That's a massive feat right there. And she invests 20 hours each week doing research. That's a good chunk of amount of time. She's done some amazing stories. Some of the best stories I love is about Justin Welsh, Lenny Rachitsky, Dickie Bush, my good friend. Shout out to him. and her thinking about doing, growth in reverse. That's the name itself is so fascinating to me. uh, and she's a writer. One of the things that you and I have common is that she started her journey as a business analyst, which I want to unpack. That's probably the first question I have. But dive in, just buckle up, because this is going to be an exciting episode for all the creators out there who are writing the newsletters and how to grow strategically in a more streamlined way. But without further ado, right off the bat, I think you and I have many commonalities. uh you know you have a good studio setup. I have a fairly, okayish studio setup. You've just moved into a new house. We bought a new house as well. You're a
Nice.
creator, I'm a creator. I can go on and on. But one of the things that struck to me when I was doing research on you is that you started your career as a business analyst in AAA, if I'm not wrong. uh, Talk to me about that corporate experience and the transformation of you being working at a corporate job to like where you are right now as a content creator.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thank you. So I don't know that I would call it a business analyst, but it was pretty close. So I was running paid ads for AAA.
Hmm.
And it's actually really funny. I got into it because I have a degree in geography. And so when I went into
Okay.
an interview, I was like applying to hundreds of jobs because I graduated in 2009, like at the height of the
Mm-hmm.
recession. My mom, shout out to my mom, she was actually sending my application into like tons of places. So I didn't even realize what I was walking
Oh,
into when I went to AAA. Um, and so
we all,
they,
we all need a mom like yours.
I know, she's pretty great.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize what I was walking into, but I actually was getting a job in their travel department, and they thought that because I had a degree in geography, it was really, a good place for me to
Hmm.
be. Which is fine. It worked out really well. And then I ended up moving into the marketing team at AAA.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I had discovered this thing called SEO through Pat Flynn of Smart Passive Income. And so
Right.
I told my boss, like, oh, we should be doing this. And of course, they were like, yeah, go ahead, do whatever you need to do. And then their paid ads guy left. So the guy that was running Google ads for them left. And they were like, well, you know how to do this organic
Mm-hmm.
stuff. Why don't you do the paid stuff? And I'm like, guys, I've
Mm-hmm.
never run a paid ad in my life. And so they put me in charge of a ton of money with all these paid ads. And I was just kind of hit the ground running, learning how to do that. And then I ended up um, having a couple clients on the side. So friends, family members needed help with their
Mm-hmm.
own Google ads. So I was helping them out. And then I ended up leaving AAA in 2017 to go out on my own.
Mm. That's
Um,
awesome.
so I've been doing that for 6 years. And then, in December of last year, I started Growth in Reverse. So
Yes,
it's just
yes.
kind of random.
That's where the whole trajectory hit. I don't know if you can see there is like this. It's kind of like blurred out, but this is what I keep on reminding myself. This is kind of like a graph, Jack Butcher
Jack
design,
Butcher. Yeah.
right? And you never know where you will basically take off. And a lot of people, they just give up, uh, right? Like like probably like two more steps, into their trajectory, and they just like, what, I'm done. But I think that's where you just have to keep going. I love the fact that 2017, it's been a long time that you were on your own, and so growth in reverse is like the thing that clicked.
Mhm.
So uh, talk to me about growth in reverse. I feel that's the biggest topic, hot topic, for this episode, I would say. One of the things I'm very curious about, why newsletter? You can choose another medium like podcasts, or you can choose doing like your own podcast monologue type of a thing, where you can like uh, guide people through your beautiful voice and whatnot. But why this medium? What made you choose newsletter over everything?
Yeah. So when I was helping clients with paid ads, I would see some of them be able to grow their email list and send an email and overnight make $10,000, $20,000 just from selling a course or a product. And I always
Hmm.
thought that was fascinating. And then in about November of last year, I found Mario Gabrielli of The Generalist. And
Hmm.
I
Yeah. Shout out.
realized that in his
Yeah.
first 12 months of writing his newsletter, he made over $300,000. And I was like, whoa, this is a little crazy. And I was like, how did he grow this? Like, how did he do that? And I wanted to figure it
Right.
out. So that ended up being the first deep dive I ever wrote. But
Hmm.
email is just super powerful. Like if you have a podcast, if you're selling a course, if you have a service, like you can promote that through your newsletter, through your email list. So I think a
Hmm.
lot of people really, sleep on that, but it's
Hmm.
a very powerful tool.
I'm one of them. I don't have like an email list. I think after talking to you, probably I'll start one in 2024. Yeah, 100%. I just have this. I think partly because I don't have a newsletter is I have this limiting belief, uh, which triggers me back and forth saying that you are not a writer. Only writers or people who have the ability to write long form deserves to have a newsletter, which is in a way BS, right? Like,
Mhm.
there are so many there are so many formats of newsletters that are popular, like 3 to 1 by James Clear, so on and so forth. Like Sean Puri, he has a short and crisp newsletter as well. Tim Ferriss has this,
Yeah,
five,
Five
I
Bullet
don't know, like,
Friday.
yeah, 5 Bullet
Yeah.
Friday and whatnot. But you're giving me push, Chanel, like, hopefully, like, I'll get it started. But yeah, so talk to me about. I think you're one of those folks who are in a way profiling creators, and founders, but particularly to growth. So why that particular topic? You can choose anything that you want. Like people who are just getting started, like how to get first 1,000 users. That can be a niche. What made you uh, become fascinated about growth in general?
I think after finding Mario and learning more about his story, I went super deep into the topic and I realized that newsletters can span so many different areas, right? So you have a James Clear or you have a Ryan Holiday who's talking about
Mm,
stoicism. There's just so many different areas and I'm really just interested in so many different things. So it just really made sense for me to profile those different creators.
mm,
I mean, startups are not really something I'm passionate about. But through this research, I've become super passionate about newsletters and how you grow an audience and
mm,
build on top of that. And, have creators build a business up for themselves that they can kind of, you know, live off of, which is really,
mm.
really fascinating.
And have you ever thought like I want to definitely dive into a lot about your research. How do you do, what is your day to day look like, what is the processes and frameworks and whatnot? But have you ever thought about being more of like a, I wouldn't say imposter, or have you ever thought of like, what, I'm studying these amazing folks, but I'm not there yet? So there is
Mhm.
two ways to that coin. One is that motivates you, which I think it did, but I'm also curious about the other things. You know what, man, this is super tough, or this requires a lot of time. Do I have everything in my ability to achieve that? So have you ever faced that self doubt when you do research, and how do you overcome it as a writer?
Yeah, I mean, all of the time. I think it was a lot more prevalent in the beginning of my journey because I'm like, who am I? Like, I know nothing about email and
Mm,
newsletters and that kind of thing. And it's still like every week I still face this. I'm like, oh, is this good enough? Like, am I doing this creator justice through my research? Um, and so it is just something that I think I'll always have to live with. But
mm,
yeah, I mean, it's definitely not uncommon for me to experience that. But I think at the end of the day, it's just really and the reason I really like what I'm doing is I'm taking something someone else has done. So like
mm,
I'm an extreme introvert. So being able to just share somebody else's story versus my own is a lot easier for me.
mm,
People ask about my story all the time, and I actually did post a couple weeks ago. I did like kind of my own deep dive of
mhm,
how I got to 24,000 subscribers in 11 months.
mm,
And so that did really well, and it got the most feedback of all of the things that I've done. But
mm.
it's easier for me to just profile other people at the end of the day. So,
And what is a okay? I think let's get into the topic. So I think you just also mentioned that you're an extreme introvert. You're talking to another fellow introvert here. We should join. We should start a club. Probably that's a newsletter we should aim for. Like, hey, introverts, join. Let's build like a safe space.
yeah.
Let's move that discussion to another day. But when you do research, talk to me about the the most comfortable phases of research and the most uncomfortable phases of research?
Yeah. I don't know that there's uncomfortable ones. It's more of just like challenging. So
Mhm.
I will essentially the first thing I do when I find a creator I want to reverse engineer is I will, kind of get a good understanding of their story and make sure there's something for my audience to learn from their story.
Mhm.
So I've
Mhm.
actually, there have been times where I've, canned a deep dive that I had scheduled or that I would plan to do. But usually I'll make sure there's a story there. And then I go out and I find all of the interviews they've ever done. So I'll go through Spotify and make a really long playlist of
Mm.
all of the things they've been on. So it's usually podcasts. I'll check YouTube for YouTube videos. I Google to see if there's any text based interviews. And then I
Mm.
start listening. So I'll go on these really long walks and I'll just listen to all of the
Mm.
interviews they've done. And then I start looking for patterns and things that they say frequently or that they say infrequently. And, you always find like a little gold nugget in every one. But yeah, so that's kind of like the main piece of it, and it takes up a lot of time for some people. Like I did research on Sahil Bloom, and he has like tons of interviews he's done. Justin Walsh was the same way. I know you had him on,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
and it was just like he's been on like 50 plus podcasts, so it's
Mm.
listening to. And sometimes I can't go through them all, so I'll try and go make a list of like which ones I think will be most beneficial. But that
Mm.
is the most time consuming part, is listening
Mm.
and reading all their interviews.
And that's so fascinating. I think I should do this too. I think not just you. I think someone else. I recently had a talk about research. I think Polina. She also mentioned the same thing, which is taking dedicating an unwavered time into research is really essential. Basically, it's not sitting in on your desk and doing general stuff like googling and all, but I think detaching from your workstation and really like putting yourself in a different position, like walking, like taking long walks. I think probably I should do it as well. But that's a
You
great
should.
tip right there. And when you do these profiles, and when you find these patterns, what is one thing that you find it super common? You've done so many profiles so far, last December, closing on 1 year, so congrats on that.
Thank you.
But what is a common pattern in your observation that all these newsletter writers, creators, founders, startups, be put it any bucket, that have one in common?
Um, are you asking about like a growth strategy or
Yeah,
something that I just okay. I
something
would
that you
say,
really felt like, this is like one thing that keep on coming back when I do these profiles.
yeah. I would say the one thing, oh, it's hard to pick. I would say they have amazing content. So it's, whether it's something super unique, they're doing a bunch of research on something, they're interviewing multiple people and combining all of that data into one piece.
Hmm.
Um, it's just good content. And I know that sounds really bland, but if
Hmm.
you don't have good content, people aren't going to share it. People aren't going to remember that you are still writing or creating what you're creating. So if your content is lackluster, it's going to be very, very hard to grow.
Hmm. And I think good content, in my opinion, is definitely value. I would say, if you ask me what is definition of good content, in my opinion, it's like 90% pure value that is going to help other people achieve. But if there is this 10% bit, I think it deserves a credit for creators to package them like in a way that's so consumable, right? So talk to me about your definition of good content, or how should one achieve when they're starting, or like for listeners who are already in the bucket of having a newsletter and like growing.
Yeah, I mean, if you already have a newsletter, the ways that I see people creating better content than others is, creating different visuals like that Jack Butcher one you're referring to. His visuals stand out. You can definitely tell that it's something he created. And
Hmm.
so that's one way. The other way is just like combining multiple different ideas together. So you think of like, I don't know, like Miss Excel, Kat Norton. She started on TikTok and she was dancing with Excel tips floating
Mm-hmm.
above our head. Like it's just really unique.
Mm.
Or you have like a Lenny Rachitsky who has deep experience in the product space, and he's able to pull that experience and his connections together and kind of create different content. You have other people who they accept like anonymous tips from people. So in the journalism world, I think that's called like a scoop. Like you get an
Mm-hmm.
exclusive story from someone. So like Gergely Oros. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but I did a deep dive on him, and he has like essentially an anonymous form that you can fill out and say like, "Hey, this tech company is going to lay off 500 people," and so like he gets those stories
Mm.
before anyone else, and it's just super
Right.
fascinating to think of that way. Or then there's like Dan from TLDR is a curated newsletter, and
Mm-hmm.
his, it's you could look at it and say it's not great, but the way he curates and the stories he curates are really interesting and people love that. So it's not
Mm.
just another, bucket of links that people are sending out. He's actually doing a really good job doing that.
I love what you mentioned about this, hear it for the first time type of stories, right, which are not never heard before, as well as curation, which is a big piece of majority of people's newsletters. They just curate in a better way. So better curators in a way are better creators. In your opinion, if you were to start, would you start, so profiling in a way is not curation, but you're also kind of adding your own touch to it, your own flavor, your own element. So if we were to like start again, would you do the same or would you do something different? Probably like start curating different profiles. What was your what would your mindset be like?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's hard to answer for everyone, but I think for me, I really enjoy going super deep on a topic or a
Hmm.
person or a creator. And then like the next week, like starting again with something different. Like that really
Hmm.
lends itself well to my strengths. But some people
Mm-hmm.
are really good at scouring the internet and finding good stories that link together. One of my favorite creators right now is a guy named Billy Oppenheimer. He actually
Oh
works
my
under
god.
Ryan Holiday. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and
Love
so
his
he
threads.
he essentially picks a theme for a week and he'll find 6 stories or quotes from like celebrities or well-known people, and he kind of like weaves them together. Super
Hmm.
fascinating. I love reading that
Hmm.
one.
Hmm. That's a great plug right there. I love his Twitter threads. Every time I learn something new. Billy's a great guy.
Yes.
So one of the things I also want to unpack is about, have you've at this point you have so many strategies in your mind because of profiling people, and what are some strategies that you implemented in your newsletter growth, like 50,000 plus subscribers, less than a year? What are some things that really worked for you, and if you want to mention whose strategies are those that you imitated, who are they?
Sure. So one of the main ones that I started copying, essentially, this guy named Ali Abulada,
Mhm.
I think is his last name. He
Oh, Ali
writes
Abdullah. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. He writes a newsletter called First 1000. And
Hmm.
he had this referral program where he was essentially, if you referred a certain number of people to his newsletter, he would shout you out in the newsletter, which is exactly what I do now. And it works pretty
Mm.
well. So that is where I got my referral program from.
Mm.
He's since changed it to be a different like giveaway every month. So if you get 20 referrals that month, you get the pitch deck from Uber or whatnot. But it really lends itself well to his audience because they're all people trying to create a startup or founders
Mm.
and that kind of thing.
Mm.
But I've just stuck with the referral program that he started with. So that was one of the
and
big ones.
and anything that you didn't apply to yourself but you found it really fascinating that you recommend other newsletter writers?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton that I haven't done because it's just, I mean, every week I, I learn something new um, from these people, which is really fascinating. But um, I mean, if you think of like a Sahil Bloom, like he'll come up with these different topics every week, and he writes his own personal piece about them and kind of does it that way. Where I haven't done that because although I want to, I would love to do like multiple issues a week to be able to
Mm.
like put out more content. But at this point, I just haven't done that. but it works well, and then you end up getting more spots for sponsorships and just engaging with your audience more frequently.
Right.
Has been doing really well for people.
Yeah. Talk to me about your. Oh, for sure. I think more content is always like uh, is something that everybody wish they want to do. Even I want to. So my podcast is a weekly podcast. I started as a bi-weekly, and then I realized, what, quickly is where people can remember. They have that attention span that they can give, and I hope it
Yeah.
they come back again week over week for a new persona, and introducing to a new creator, founder, etc. uh, but at the same time, I wish I had like a daily podcast.
That's a
it,
lot of
it
work.
That's a lot of work, so more is always a lot of work. And so, yeah, one of the things, when you research, right, talk to me about your note taking process. I know you said about long walks, registering,
Mhm.
some of the ideas, and you probably come back. So note taking is such an important piece. You find these angles, patterns. How do you compose your notes in a way that converts into a weekly edition?
Yeah, good question. So when I'm walking, it can be challenging to like type with your fingers on your phone while you're moving. So I usually do like the voice to text thing, and I'll
Mm,
just kind of speak out what I'm thinking or what I just heard, and then I'll include like a little timestamp so I can go back to that if I need to. But honestly, at the end of the day, a lot of the notes end up getting scrapped or they don't get included, and I think it's
mm,
just that me going through and actually taking the notes is where the value really is. It's not necessarily going back to the notes. Just the act of actually writing them down or speaking them helps me put that together and kind of start writing the deep dive. But
mm,
yeah, I mean the deep dive, it's pretty formulaic. Like it's not necessarily a template, but it's got the same sections so that people know what to expect every week, which also makes it a little easier to write because I know what to include. But yeah, a lot of the notes don't even get included in the final piece.
What would you do with that? Like, I'm curious. Like the things that didn't end up in the newsletter, you must have so much material. How are you
Yeah.
thinking? What are you doing with that? You're sitting on a gold mine, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, I've been struggling to be consistent on Twitter and LinkedIn. And this past
Hmm.
week, I did a deep dive on Austin Belsack, and he has like over 1.3 million followers on LinkedIn. But
Wow.
his
On LinkedIn?
process on
Wow.
LinkedIn, yeah,
I thought you were going to say Twitter, but whoa,
yeah,
who's this guy? My
yeah.
God.
So he talks about, getting jobs and changing careers and that kind of thing. So it's actually really beneficial and it meshes well with the LinkedIn audience. So I think that's
Hmm.
why he got so big. But he's actually close friends with Justin Welsh. But yeah, so he told Jay Klaus of Creator Science that
Mhm.
he tried to get started on LinkedIn 3 or 4 times and it never stuck. And what
Hmm.
got him to finally be consistent, like ongoing, was that he put together 30 to 40 pieces of content that he had in
Hmm.
a backlog. So he created
Hmm.
all of these posts before actually sharing them on LinkedIn. So then he was
Hmm.
able to kind of, have this backlog of content to fall back on if he couldn't think of anything to write that morning. So I think I'm going to
Hmm.
try and do that with all of those notes that I have that haven't gotten used.
Yeah, volume. So even,
Yeah.
when I started my journey on Twitter, I had like 200, even less than, followers. The only thing that got me uh, going is I used to post like 40 to 50 tweets per day. I'm not doing now.
Wow.
Uh, in the beginning, I used to go ballistic. Like I have a full, I definitely, back then I had like a full-time job in my, corporate setup. And you know how corporate usually works, right? Like it's not time consuming, but it's really boring.
Mhm.
So I took up on a challenge that every time I feel bored, I used to like literally go on Twitter, like, just document any thought that comes to my mind. Like just this guy Billy picked the theme. I used to like pick like a certain topic I'm very fascinated about, either I learn or know about, right? That really actually, like, helped uh, get people's mind registered on me as an individual. It also gave me like a way to express, because there is no filtration. You just put it out, and it helped me become more vulnerable, transparent, and build up that persona. As an introvert, that persona would have never existed if I would have never documented. So please do it. Like, it really helps. Forget about followers that count, that's separate, but I had intangible benefits of just documenting, on an ongoing basis. So volume there really works. uh Shout out to Jay Close, good friend. He's on the podcast too.
Oh, good.
Man, we live in a very small world, right?
Yes.
uh and you also mentioned, so my favorite scoop of growth in reverse is, I literally wrote it. I can show you. Like Kat Norton,
Oh, yeah.
she's like she runs Miss Excel on YouTube, and she's what, like 2 million per year. I'm sure she has grown
Yeah. It might be
more
even
than
more
that
at this point. Yeah.
at this point. What's your favorite scoop of growth in reverse? Like, who's your all-time favorite if you want to mention?
Hmm. That's a good question. I always come back to the Justin Welsh.
Hmm.
I don't know, but Jack Butcher's up there too. So I just love Justin's story. Like
Hmm.
it's so straightforward. Like the way he does it, he shares all of his systems, and it's really
Mhm.
just, be consistent, create something every week, post on LinkedIn and Twitter every day, and like his it's very formulaic and it's so straightforward, and I just really love the way he puts out content and actually helps people and cares about the people he's interacting with. He's
Hmm.
not just, out there to make money or,
Yeah.
do the creator thing because it's fancy or fun or whatnot.
Right.
But then Jack Butcher at the same time, like he's completely changed, I think, that the way creators think about content, because it's typically you're thinking of like a podcast or writing, and he's come in and he completely changed it with visuals, and everything's visual. And if you can figure out a way to add visuals to your content, it just becomes so much more powerful. So
Hmm.
his story is really fascinating to me too,
Big
even though
shout out
he's
to
kind of
Jeff.
like gone in the NFT route now, but
Yeah, big shout out to both. Jack is the first guest on my podcast. I'm so fortunate uh,
wow.
to kickstart with Jack. He's an amazing, amazing, amazing creator. I know he's kind of is in his own world right now with all the NFTs. So but he's still one of the best. Justin, of course, a quick fun story. I've told this many times. Justin is the one who helped me learn about sales when I was building this product called Shoutout. I never sold anything. I'm an introvert. Like I had like no clue. I can build a great product. I can do all that, understand people and all that, but never had this ability to sell. But he brought me. He removed that self doubt in a way that he shared some of the stories with him that happened when he was doing consulting, and before even like building that $1 million business. That really helped me, like, what, this is the framework. You can use authenticity to sell. Like very few
Hmm,
people realize that. So big shout out to Justin as well. uh,
that's
so let's
awesome.
switch gears a little bit about uh, reverse engineering. uh, so doing research can be linear. You start from A, you end up point B, and there are so many takeaways, patterns, like you mentioned. But your niche that you're excelling or succeeding is going back and reverse engineering it and teaching in a way that other people can replicate others playbook. So how does the process of reverse engineering work, and what does it teach you about growth strategies?
Yeah, it teaches me a lot. But reverse engineering, like what I was talking to you about before, I start with all those interviews, and then I kind of pull out, okay, here are the three things they did in the beginning, and then
Mhm.
I go and try and find the examples. So I will go to their website, or I'll use a tool called the Wayback Machine, which is like
Mm.
my favorite tool on the internet. So
You can
essentially,
find
it'll take.
all the weird screenshots there.
Oh man, it's great. So, if like a Dickie Bush says he did something a long time ago and now it's gone off the internet, I'll go back and see if I can't find it in the Wayback Machine, just to
Like,
be able to give my audience like a screenshot of what he had done in the past.
right.
And because most people don't really take the time to do that, it's pretty
Mm,
powerful. Or like a Drew Riley from trends.vc. He
yeah.
actually is very into A/B testing and optimizing
Mhm.
his website. So I found like 17 iterations of his homepage just by going through every snapshot of the Wayback Machine. Um, so then I shared all of those on my deep dive of his business.
Wow, Drew.
Yeah.
Man, Chanel, we have so many, we know so many people in common. Drew is a good
Yes.
friend. I
I was
know him
going through
before
your podcast list and I was like, oh, this is awesome.
I know Drew before Drew started Trends. So I've
Wow.
collaborated with him a couple of projects. We had this small mastermind. He's part of amazing. He's a great,
Yes.
incredible guy. Uh, I love the fact
Super
that we
nice guy.
use, yeah, super nice guy, super straightforward guy. No bullshitting around him. He's
Hmm.
just, you know, no sugarcoating, nothing. He's just, give it to you.
Yes.
And what a great hack! I know Wayback Machine, uh, but I never used it for research. That is so. That's the biggest takeaway for me. I should use it. Probably I'll
Yeah,
tweet it
you
about
should.
after this. But one of the things about reverse engineering, right? Like, what's the most surprising thing you've learned from reverse engineering? Doing these research on these top, creators.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple. I think the first one is that everyone starts out like a little nervous about it. Like
Hmm.
if you go back and listen to like the first interviews everyone's done, it's like, well, I didn't really
Right.
know if this was going to work, but I just went ahead and tried it. And so I
Hmm.
always tell a lot of people who come to me and ask like, what's your biggest piece of advice? I'm like, just get started. Like it might change a year down the road, but you can just start now and see if you can't figure it out. Like Packy McCormick started and he didn't see, I don't even think he hit 1,000 subscribers for like the first year he was
Yeah.
writing. So
Hmm.
it's just like now he's a huge name in the creator space, but it took him a long time to get there. So
Hmm.
there's a lot of stories where you see these shiny, oh, this newsletter hit 60,000 subscribers in 5 months. And it's like, well, that's not the norm. Like most people, it takes time. And the sustainable newsletters that I think will be around for a while actually do take a little time to
Hmm.
grow.
Hmm. And uh, I think starting is such an important piece. I just want to add, piggyback of what you said. I think the best way to start is start small. Don't even
Mm.
think about comparing yourself with your heroes in that position, because I think many people just stop there because they didn't do a good job of what Chanel is doing in November 2023, because they just are getting started, right? I think
Yep.
everybody should really go to their V1 versions if they're matching with themselves with others.
Yeah. It's so easy to get overwhelmed when you're looking at someone who has a podcast and a newsletter and a YouTube channel. And it's like, well, yeah, but they've been doing this for 6 years. Like you can start small, start with a newsletter or start with one, content medium and then grow from there. Like you don't have to do everything at once.
And I think the second biggest motivation, at least that worked for me, is doing for yourself.
Mm.
I
Yes.
do this podcast. It's been over a year. I do this purely for myself so that I can learn from people like you, ambitious people, creators who are making a ripple. I would have never started this if I have this ambition, not an ambition, but like this expectation of how do I bring or deliver content to X number of listeners, because that's pressure right there. So
Yeah.
it's already hard to start. So on top of it, if you put expectations that you want to deliver value for X reasons, you're never going to start. I think that really worked for me. Do it for yourself. Genuinely have that curiosity. What can I learn from this person? Like whether it is podcasting or even newsletter. I think that's how you started as well. Mario's case study or profile really triggered. Okay, there is something there. What if I keep on repeating that something, right? I think that's how you ended up being gathering like more than 50,000 people because you're the first subscriber to your newsletter.
Yeah. And with Mario's deep dive, I was actually doing the research before I had the idea to create the newsletter. So I was kind of just reverse engineering his story to figure it out for myself. And then after a
Mm.
while, I was like, wait, I'm putting a lot of energy into this. And I couldn't find anyone else doing something like Growth and Reverses now. So I was like, let me see if somebody else wants to read this. So I just made it into like an easier to read blog post and then started a newsletter around it. So it did
What
start
was
for me.
your, yeah, I'm curious now that I shared my kind of, my tidbit about when I started. What was going on your mind when you just started? What was your expectation like? Were you doing this for fun, for a living? When did you take it like, okay, you know what, I can make a living out of it? What was those initial days look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, the first few posts, I didn't even realize if this was going to be like a thing that I continued to do or if it was just, I was excited about it for 3 weeks and then I was going to drop off because I have
Hmm.
a tendency to do that with things I get excited about. Um, so it's just really interesting to kind of understand and learn as you go. And then I
Mm-hmm.
realized after probably 4 or 5 issues, I was like, whoa, there's something here. And
Hmm.
people are really, really enjoying this. So I just kept going. But I mean, I still have one or two clients left doing paid ads. But I do plan to kind of phase them out here shortly. So
Hmm.
um, this will become my full-time thing in probably a month or two.
What is your moment of this is pointless in the last 1 year? When did you feel like, oh my God, this is really ridiculous, I should do something else?
That's an interesting question. I don't think I've had that yet, which is really fascinating. I've been lucky enough that since the early days, people are just like really interested in this and they're sharing it.
Hmm.
I even get messages from the people I'm doing the deep dive on saying this is really fascinating. So at this point, I haven't had that yet. Um, so hopefully my growth trajectory is still still ahead of us here. But yeah, I mean, it's been the most fun I've had in business ever. So I'm gonna
That's
keep going with
awesome.
it.
Yeah, let's hope you won't feel the heat or the self doubt. You're killing it. I love your newsletter. Like I said in the beginning, that's one thing I open for sure
Thank you.
every time. Uh, and when it comes to these profiles, how do you pick? What's your selection criteria? Do you look up for someone who was like you, or do you look like, okay, let's actually completely go in a different route, pick some random person who has an interesting story? What is your criteria?
It's a good question. At this point, I have a list of people that I might potentially do deep dives on that I'll go through. Like every Monday, I'll go through and I'll kind of pick which one I do for that week, or I'll try and pick one and then start researching and be like, man, I'm not really feeling that one this week, so pick a different one. But the criteria is really they have more than 50,000 subscribers. And I like to do non AI newsletters at this point. I did one on Zane Khan of Superhuman, but I think I don't know. I feel like I enjoy the more sustainable type of newsletters, like someone who's been doing this for 3 or more years. Just because I don't know, I feel like they're not just jumping into something just to sell it and get out real quick. So it's more
Hmm.
fascinating. But yeah, it's really just what I feel drawn to that week. There's
Hmm.
not really, I don't have a schedule going forward or anything. So yeah, that's kind of
Why
just
why
pick a
why
list.
50K as a mark? Why do you think, is that where you feel like growth will happens automatically, or why pick 50,000?
I think it's big enough that it stands out. And it's also to me in the beginning, it felt like a point where if someone made it to 50,000 subscribers, they were going to stick with that thing. Like
Hmm.
now I feel like with paid ads and stuff, like a lot of people get there faster and I'm not sure that they're going to stick with it. So I probably won't profile them. But um, for a solo creator, if they hit 50,000, it's like a big deal. And I feel like
Hmm.
they've tried enough things, they've done enough, they've had enough experiences that it's worth going back and reverse engineering their story.
I think in your what you're saying is it's something that's achievable, but it's at the same time, there is a growth hack that kicks off to reach that number. That's good. Do you I know you already kind of expressed how you grew to like 26k subscribers for Growth in Reverse, but what are some things that you didn't cover in that? We will definitely like plug that edition, but what is something that you didn't cover that you want to probably, like, now that you're talking, expressing like in real time, how would you uh, do a scoop on yourself, like 0 to where you are right now?
Yeah, I think I covered most of it in that post because I actually gave a talk at a conference in October. And so I had to like kind of go back through and figure out how I did it. So I really spent a
Mm.
lot of time researching what I did and going back through. But again, I think it comes back down to like putting out content that's unique or something different that people don't see every day is really going to be the thing that catapults you. Like you can run paid ads to any newsletter and you'll probably get a few subscribers. But if it's not something that people look at and they go, whoa, this is different, or whoa, this is saving me
Mm.
time, I think it's going to be really hard to take like the growth that you've started and really amplify that, if you will. So I really think it starts with content. I've gotten a lot of good feedback of people saying like, I read this every week. I look for this in my inbox, which is always a good sign. I think if you find something your audience really enjoys reading every single week, you're going to have an easier time. And
Mm-hmm.
that just makes everything else easier. So because I spend so much time and people can see that I'm passionate about this, they'll refer other people to me or they want to share recommendations and I'll recommend their newsletter. They recommend mine.
Mm.
Those kinds of things work well. Cross
Mm.
promotions also. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really, content and then building relationships with other creators, I think are the two that really like have a big impact.
Value and network, I think that's
Yes.
two biggest ingredients for that will set up for success. One of
Agreed.
the things, if I may deep dive into your not a deep dive, but more of like dissecting how you write your newsletter, one of the things I really observe, two things. One is you don't put the content in the newsletter, you make sure that people click so that they end up on your website, right? So you hyperlink it, number one. I want
Hmm.
to understand why. And did you do like an A/B testing there of versus like you writing the content, putting copy pasting everything there versus hyperlink? Uh, Number two is you have a very interesting way of introducing a deep dive. Even that, or even like if you want to give you a shout out to some creator, most of the times you don't mention their name. It
Yes.
actually is really like, what, let me click this so that who is this, you kind of entice people. So if you can talk to me about a little bit more about both of those points, at least that's my observation. uh the juicy reads, even in that you don't really say that, hey, this is the person wrote this. You have like an enticing takeaway that you mentioned in that. So talk to me about both of those.
Yeah. So the first one, why I don't put the full deep dive in an email, it actually was kind of accidental. I just started realizing that because these were like 3,000 plus words long on a regular basis, like it was going to get
Hmm.
cut off halfway through anyway. So somebody would have to click over to the website. And it also, I have a little bit of a design background, very small, and it just looks better on a web page, in my
Hmm.
opinion. Um, but also, I think a lot of the things that I talk about, like, could this is totally there's no data to back this up, but I think some of the words that I use in my deep dives could trigger a spam filter, like I don't know, the way this person made $1 million or that kind of thing.
Hmm.
I think it could trigger a spam filter. I have no data to back that up though. So I just I use the link to send people to the website
Hmm.
just because
Got
they're
it.
too long anyway, and the
Hmm.
images that I include would be too heavy, if you will.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, they'd have to click over anyway. And
Hmm.
then so why I don't say their name before I, introduce the link to the deep dive. I think a lot of people, myself included, when you hear a name of a creator that there comes like an inherent bias that you have in your mind. Like even with Austin Belsack, he has 1.3 million LinkedIn followers, and it just, sometimes you feel this like pang of like, I don't really want to learn from this guy. It's too far out of reach. Like I'm not gonna there's nothing
Mm,
in there that's relatable for me. So
interesting.
by teasing it out and having someone click through, I feel like there's more of a chance that they'll actually read through the whole thing and learn something. But it also just makes for a good, not necessarily clickbait title, but gets people enticed and clicking through to learn more.
Mm, that's very fascinating. I think there's like a psychological thing as well. You said about bias. Once you know someone, you either, like you said, you know what, they're doing interesting stuff, but what I need is something that I can take away immediately. I think that takeaway itself can be a trigger.
Mhm.
That's amazing. And going back to your other thing, do you think, in your opinion, friction is good when it comes to newsletter? So adding a hyperlink is friction, right? They're
Mhm.
not getting the first. You're asking to do one more step. Opening an email is a step one. Reading through the first few lines, step two. Clicking on the URL, step three, and then they get, basically there is like a step to step, friction. Do you think friction works in newsletter? If not, or even in your research, right? You've done so many people's deep dives. What is your opinion on friction?
I think both ways could work. I think it really depends on your content, your audience, that kind of thing. Um, I don't do it to necessarily introduce friction, but it doesn't hurt that people have to click through to read the deep dive because, open rates these days are kind of questionable anyway. So a click is maybe more reliable as a metric for you to
Mm,
understand, like, if people are actually interested in your content. Um,
that's interesting.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, friction could work, but I don't do it just for the sake of adding friction. But I think, yeah, I mean, if I was writing shorter pieces, I probably would just put the whole thing in the newsletter.
Mm. The reason I asked the question is, generally, there is a big shift in terms of offering friction versus not offering friction, just in general, even in products. Which I used to think a lot about not offering friction, because the more easy it is, the more conversions. Like, if you're building a product, users being using free to like paid and whatnot. But lately, if you realize, that's what at least my realization is, the more friction you add, the more serious buyers you're encouraging. Like, people who go through those steps, that means they're really taking the pain, but because they're very interested in whatever you're doing, right? So that's why I asked, like, uh, will that work for content as well? The more friction you add, that means you have like a serious reader, like 24K, whoever is clicking. That's interesting too, like click rate versus open rate, right?
Hmm.
So I want to ask you, I think, we're at the end of the time, but how do you measure the success of growth in reverse? Like, what are your key metrics that you follow?
I mean, number of subscribers is great, but it doesn't really tell the whole story at the end of the day. For me right now, success is when I get replies to the newsletter or someone DMs me on Twitter and says, "Oh my God, I read this one this week and I had 4 takeaways that I just gave two to my VA, like that I'm going to
Mm,
implement this week." Like, that to me is the whole reason this is so much fun, is like just learning, helping other people grow. And then those people come back and they're like, "Hey, I tried this and it didn't work." So then I learn through that as well. So it's really just,
mm,
building a sense of community and helping other people with their own newsletters. I think a lot of this content creation and audience game it gets more challenging as time goes on. And I think that if you can help someone, have their content
mm.
do just a little bit better, then you're on the right path.
Awesome. One last question before we wrap up. I'm very, very curious about what's next for Chanel and growth in reverse. Like, what are you exploring right now? What is an ambitious thing you are doing in 2024, now that we're entering into a new year? Will you keep on? Of course, you will keep on writing about profiles. Any interesting projects that you're thinking about?
Yeah, I'm getting ready to put out a course around what I've learned. So you can read all the deep dives and you get, some takeaways, but I'm trying to, share the how people use a specific growth tactic throughout,
Hmm.
like not just one person's story. It's like how these 6 people did it, and here are the top 5 takeaways, and have videos explaining how they've done that. And then it's
Hmm.
also just like how I've been able to grow my newsletter. So I'm kind of combining
Hmm.
both of those things into one course. So that should be out later this year, actually. But that's the biggest
Nice.
thing right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward for that. I think the biggest thing I'm manifesting for you is, I think you should write a book,
Oh,
and the title
thank you.
should be Growth in Reverse, period. It's
I
so,
appreciate that.
yeah, I would love to, I would be your first buyer, because I would love to implement. The thing about growth is, the beautiful thing about growth is, it applies to everything, but its own way, right? Like, I build products. I do this content piece as well as a creator, but some of the things you write about friction, like for example, what, maybe friction can be introduced in product too. So I feel that's the angle that I look forward to. Like, many people have different angles. They purely are growing their newsletters, reading Growth in Reverse, but it would be an awesome feat if you probably, like, bundle up with writing a book. So manifesting for that, Chanel.
I appreciate that. My friend Kat keeps telling me the same thing every time I see her. So might have to listen to you guys here soon.
That's it. Yeah, we say for a reason. So,
Yeah.
but any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I think it all just comes back to getting started. No matter what you're doing, is just taking that first step is the really
Hmm.
big thing here. So
I love that. And,
yeah.
hopefully we'll get a deep dive about how you built your studio. I'm so kind of in awe. Like, it looks so good, so beautiful. But on that note, like, that's it, guys. Like, start. That's the best way. And to achieve what, any dreams of yours, but just do in a very small way. Go micro before you go macro.
Yes, definitely.
That really helps uh, to move faster. It's so underappreciated, but if you do it, you'll know the power. And stay tuned, guys. Like, we have some awesome creators, founders, VCs, like Chanel, joining the show. Stay tuned for more episodes, and I'm so grateful for your attention, your time giving to us, and we do this for you. Hopefully you learned something new today, and stay tuned for the next episode. Cheers.
Thanks.